The wind moves first. It rises from the empty plains, a low voice without a mouth, pushing through tall grass and the ribs of distant mountains. Dusk gathers slowly, turning the sky to bronze. A lone herder sits on a hill beside his horse, holding a flute the color of ivory. When he lifts it to his lips, the first note is almost lost, half breath, half echo, until the sound seems to come not from him, but from the land itself, drifting outward like smoke and dissolving into horizon. For centuries this has been the language of the steppe, less spoken than breathed. In a world without walls, sound travels farther than sight. People here learned that a voice can ride the wind. Their music was not built for rooms. It was made to vanish beautifully in open air. Among their instruments, the most sacred were not carved from wood or cast from metal, but shaped from bone, the body of another creature, lending its quiet voice to the living. To play was to remember. To listen was to speak with ghosts. Long before empires rose, before horses carried banners across the horizon, shamans of the early steppe carved small whistles from the bones of eagles and wolves. They believed every creature possessed a key, a current of spirit that moved like breath through its bones. When the body died, the current lingered in silence. Return wind to the hollow, and the spirit answered. The sound they made wasn't entertainment, it was conversation. These flutes, called keen chimeg, wind adornments, were no longer than a finger, polished smooth by hand and worn at the chest. Played in trance, their notes were high and thin, almost invisible, yet animals stirred when they sounded. Hunters swore falcons circled lower, as if recognizing their own forgotten voices. The shamans played to borrow qualities from the natural world, courage from the wolf, sight from the eagle, endurance from the horse. Each tone was a small vow, that life and death share a single breath. When someone died, a flute was placed beside the body to guide the spirit. Found centuries later, such instruments often carried the faint scent of smoke and steppe grass, as though memory itself refused to fade. The wind bones taught an early lesson. Art is not always creation. Often it is continuation. To play was to keep breathing for those who could not. The mourning pipe. As tribes gathered under shared banners, sound became ceremony. By the 12th century, travelers along the Orkhon River wrote of funerals that lasted for days, processions of riders in black felt, their flutes crying against the wind. Among these instruments was the ulin surd, the mourning pipe. Legend says the first appeared when a mother lost her son in battle. She carried his bow home, and, unable to bear its silence, carved its broken end into a flute. The sound was thin and trembling, as though the wood remembered pain. Over time, the act of grief became tradition. Craftsmen began shaping flutes from materials that once carried life: horn, antler, and eventually bone. Human bone was reserved for the most sacred rites. It was not taken from strangers or war trophies, but offered by elders or shamans before death. If the mouth could no longer speak, the body could still sing. Such flutes became heirlooms of breath, vessels through which descendants held a conversation across generations. During memorials, players stood facing the wind. The tone was closer to a sigh than a melody, bending like smoke from burning juniper. People said these notes guided souls along invisible paths toward the realm of ancestors. Some believed each phrase opened a small door between worlds, just enough for farewell. The instruments were kept like relics, polished with butter and ash, wrapped in felt, stored in sacred tents. They were never used for dance or celebration. To misuse them invited misfortune. Only in mourning did breath pass through bone, yet the sound endured beyond ceremony. Travelers spoke of flutes heard at night when no player stood nearby. Some said it was the wind remembering. Others said it was the spirit learning to play its own departure. When the Mongol Empire rose, the mourning pipe followed its armies. Chroniclers claimed that before battle, flutists played facing the sunrise, reminding warriors that victory and death share a rhythm. Both are returns to silence. For those who lived by conquest, the music offered something gentler than glory. But among nomads and herders, the old instruments remained, carried like portable graves of sound. Their players were respected less as musicians than as keepers of breath. Even today, elders in remote valleys speak of nights when wind whistles through the skulls of the mountains and sounds like flutes. They call it the music of those who learn to speak through silence, the mourning that never ends, only changes pitch. The Khan's horn. By the 13th century, the steppe had found its rhythm, the thunder of hooves. The empire of Genghis Khan reached from Siberia to Persia. Beneath the roar of armies, music remained the pulse that bound them. On nights before war, camps filled with the low breath of horns and long, keening flutes as if the earth itself exhaled. Among those instruments was one called the Khan's horn, a ceremonial trumpet said to have been carved from a single great bone. Some swore it was a whale's spine, washed far inland by a forgotten flood. Others whispered it had been part of a warrior's skeleton, transformed by reverence into an emblem of rule. Rashid al-Din mentions a horn of white bone, whose cry was like 1,000 storms. The horn wasn't used to terrify enemies so much as to summon loyalty. Its note traveled like a signal to awaken courage. Herds paused, and men bowed their heads, as if the sky were speaking. In Mongol belief, even conquest answered to the spirits. The flutes of mourning and horns of command shared a single breath, offerings to the invisible. As Mongol banners spread, so did their instruments, and their taboos. Foreign courts called the bone horn a voice from the grave. Chinese officials sometimes banned it, fearing it unsettled the dead. To the steppe, such fear simply missed the point. The horn didn't summon ghosts, it reminded the living to breathe. When the empire fractured, the horn slipped into legend. Some said it was buried with Kublai Khan in a hidden tomb, sealed so no unworthy wind could sound it. Others believed it dissolved into desert air, its voice scattered among storms. Whatever its fate, an echo remained, the deep hum that preludes thunder across plains. People said it was the bone of the world, remembering how to speak. The silence drums. Centuries passed, the sound of bone faded. As Buddhism spread across Mongolia and Islam took root in Central Asia, older shamanic practices receded. Temples rose where open sky had served as altar. New teachings spoke of compassion and restraint. Bone, once sacred, became a reminder of impermanence rather than a source of wisdom. In place of vanished flutes came the silence drums. Skins stretched over hollow wood, struck softly during meditation. The pulse mimicked breathing. Drumming did not summon spirits, it measured calm. Death no longer needed a voice, it required understanding. Among herders outside monasteries, memory persisted. They buried their instruments and played through imitation, humming through reeds, whispering into the wind, teaching children to hear tones hidden inside quiet. In monasteries, another reverence emerged, voices layered into overtones. At dusk, monks chanted low notes that blended with wind, producing kumi, a voice within a voice. Listeners claimed they could hear the echo of old bone instruments in those tones, faint, internal, reborn in the body. Asked if they missed the flutes, a monk smiled. The wind never stopped. We learned to keep it inside. The age of silence wasn't absence but restraint. Music retreated from objects and entered the chest. Drum replaced flute, breath replaced horn. Mourning turned into meditation. Even without instruments, the air remembered. At night, the plains returned to their vast hush. Fires flickered in distant tents. Stars pressed down like frost. Somewhere, perhaps, wind moved through old bone buried in sand, releasing notes too soft for ears, but not for memory. The steppe traded resonance for reflection, the music of loss becoming the art of listening. The revival of the steppe wind. At sunrise, the modern steppe looks unchanged, a sea of grass under a sky too wide to belong to anyone. Yet beneath that old silence, something has returned. Across Mongolia and Tuva, voices rise again, low and resonant, shaping air into sound that feels half human, half elemental. The instrument is the throat, the art is kurmi, and those who practice it say they are continuing what bone began. To hear it is to feel the world breathe. A singer produces two tones at once, a deep drone and a high whistle that floats like wind through a reed. The effect is haunting and familiar, as if the air remembered an older music. "We do not make the sound," says a singer in Kovd. "The mountain makes it through us." The technique, passed through families, descends, so tradition says, from shamanic flutes. The body is the instrument now. Ribs and skull carry resonance once found in eagle wings and antlers. Where ancient players guided spirits, today's singers honor them. The setting has changed, the belief remains. In the far western plains, an elder named Batsaikan sings at funerals. He begins with a whisper that grows until the ground seems to hum like distant thunder. Mourners don't weep, they listen. The melody bends with the wind and fades, leaving quiet behind. "When I sing," he says, "the ancestors recognize the sound. They know we remember some musicians carve replicas of old flutes, not for use, but for reverence. They place them on altars beside bowls of milk and strands of horsehair, offerings to those who taught them to turn silence into rhythm. The flutes remain unplayed, yet their shape seems to hum in the presence of song. The circle closes. The living body carries the spirit of an instrument once made from the dead. Each year, young singers gather for the Festival of Winds. There are no stages, no amplifiers, only open plains and a sky that swallows sound whole. Facing the four directions, they begin together, each voice a column of breath. Harmonics ripple outward until the air itself seems to vibrate. The steppe, after centuries of restraint, speaks its language again. To outsiders, the performance sounds ancient, almost alien. To descendants of nomads, it feels like home. In a world that moves too fast, they have rediscovered a way to stand still and listen. The flutes are gone, the horns dissolved, yet bone remains within them, resonating each time they exhale. What began as mourning has become continuity, grief transformed into art, loss into echo. From eagle bone whistles to overtone singers, the story of bone music is not disappearance but return. Every transformation, from instrument to voice, from mourning to meditation, carries the same truth. Sound is the breath of impermanence, and impermanence the essence of sound. The steppe teaches this with every gust. Nothing here lasts, yet the plain holds memory in motion. Bone flutes, once made from what had died, gave the living a way to speak without words, to remember without sorrow. When those flutes fell silent, their music found a new chamber, the human body. Monks and singers understood what the ancients knew. Death is not the end of music, only the beginning of resonance. In Buddhist thought, every vibration ripples through unseen worlds. Steppe musicians felt the same. Each note carried spirit outward until it became weather. The belief endures. When a throat singer performs beneath open sky, his voice merges with wind and travels farther than he will. The audience is not merely people, it is the land itself. Today's revival is not nostalgia, it is the continuation of listening, a reminder that our bodies are made of the same materials we bury and the air we breathe. When breath meets bone, it becomes story. When story meets silence, it becomes prayer. As twilight falls, the last sound is not applause but echo. The wind threads through tall grass, playing its endless refrain. Somewhere beneath the soil lie remnants of old instruments, their hollows filled with sand, their edges softened by time. When the storm passes, the air hums faintly, a pitch too low to measure, too human to forget. That hum is the steppe's heartbeat, the sound of bone remembering breath. And for a moment, the whole world seems to be listening.